All right. Well, welcome. We are excited to have you here today. We've got again, the bit.ly here. We would love to give a huge shout out and thank you again to our partners at McGraw Hill, who really have been, kind of instrumental in helping us get these webinars up and moving with regard to our Pathways to Personalization book. This is webinar number 3. If you haven't had a chance to check out numbers 1 and 2, we do have them online on YouTube at this point. Roshni has links to those that she can blast out in the follow-up email, so you can check those out or share them with friends and family if you're interested. Just a reminder who we are. I'm Shawn Rubin. I'm the Chief Education Officer at the Highlander Institute, co-author of the Pathways to Personalization book with Cathy Sanford to my left, who's going to be pretty quiet today. She's feeling a little shy. And then Roshni Lakhi, who has basically was part of the design force behind the book. All those charts and graphs and different things that you see in the book are all courtesy of Roshni. And also Roshni has just been instrumental in helping us figure out how to promote and get the book out there. And so we're excited to have Roshni here co-facilitating this evening.
Thanks, Shawn.
All right. So moving on, we wanted to hear a little bit about who else is on tonight. So I see that George is on. George, how you doing? All the way from Brazil. Good to see you, George. Who else is on the
Hi.
Let's just, why don't we weigh in? You
to
can
be here.
take your, maybe we should do it in the chat room. Do you guys see the chat room? If you just click in the chat room, you can kind of give yourself a little introduction, and then everybody else will be able to see who's on the call. So go ahead and just kind of tap in and let people know who's on the call. And I'm gonna keep moving while you do that, just so we keep grooving on this afternoon. All right. First of all, how's my sound? Everyone, we doing okay on sound over there? All right.
Yep, you sound great.
Fantastic. So just a reminder, a little bit of where we are, where we're at, just to kind of a little bit of level setting on the work that we're doing here. This framework, this book, was built in response to a lot of the work that we as an organization were doing with schools and districts, where in many ways, they kind of didn't actually know how to get from point A to point B with regard to personalized instruction. And so really what we were helping them decide is first kind of a deep interrogation of where are you now? What are some of the assets and strengths that exist within your local context? And then what's your vision, your aspirational vision for where you want to see these classrooms move? And so that's the where are we going? And then in that process, we talked a lot about how do you get there? And up until this point, we've talked about the planning phase, we've talked about the piloting phase, we've talked a little bit about the refine phase, and how we kind of look at our pilots really closely and make decisions about what's worthy of scale. But now we want to talk about that actual scaling phase. And so today is really that kind of final stretch of this, which could last, multiple years, but really is about, having the long arc in mind as you're kind of designing the earliest stages of this work. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually break this down a little bit further today and have some time to really do some deep discussion with regard to where you guys are coming from in the framework. And we're actually going to start, in terms of bringing others along. And so we're going to start today with an actual breakout, where I think we probably could all fit in one breakout room, Roshni, at this point, based off of the number of folks that are here. Do you want to kind of launch that first breakout? We're going to have everybody look at a rubric that we've designed for the framework as kind of a self-assessment, kind of a self-check of where you are with regard to the different phases of the where are we now, where are we going. And so we're going to have you just take a look at that individually and kind of have a little bit of a reflection moment. And then we're going to have an opportunity for each person to kind of introduce themselves, share some big idea or concern. If it has to do with the rubric, great. If it has to do with something off of the rubric, fantastic. And then we were going to have you decide on one to bring back to the group, but since we're all going to be in the same breakout together, we can use that extra 2 minutes to kind of debrief maybe some of the questions that are raised during that time. So I'm going to turn it over to Roshni. She's going to pull us all into a breakout. Or does it make sense, Roshni, to just have everybody turn on their video and phone here, and we can just do it directly from where we are?
Yeah, I think we can just do it right here. We can just unmute and put everyone's videos on, and then you guys can all just chat in here. We
Okay.
have 4 people online with us right now. And speaking of maps, they're from all over the map. We have Audra from Nevada, Eric from right outside of Chicago, George is from Brazil, and then Brian's joining us from Cranford, New Jersey. So all over the map, which is great. Thank you for joining us today.
And once again, just to give you the caveat, if you're not in the mood to turn your video on, don't feel obligated. If you're driving and this is and just listening, don't get in an accident. So please use discretion in terms of whether you turn your video on or off, and whether you're able to actually read the rubric at this point in time or not. So we'll give you a few minutes to look through the rubric. Flag for us if you have any trouble getting into the rubric, and we'll come back in 3 minutes to have a little bit of a discussion.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute everybody. And again, if Shawn mentioned, if you're not in a place where you can watch the video, keep your video off, but if not, feel free to turn it on. Thanks, Eric.
All right. Give you about 30 more seconds to kind of pop through the rubric. So we have some folks joining too, Roshni. Oh no. Same good. All right, cool. All right. Anyone want to start? Anyone want to kind of jump in? Feel free to share a big idea, maybe that you're thinking about with regard to the framework, a concern you're thinking about, a question regarding some aspect of the framework. But we'd love to hear from you. Who wants to jump in?
I can start.
Awesome.
So Waukegan is Waukegan High School is the second largest high school in the state of Illinois.
Okay.
We're a very far north suburb of Chicago, almost Wisconsin.
Okay.
And we have city problems in a suburban environment. And we have lots of people who buy in. We can get lots of change agents, but there's a little bit of a disconnect with district office who houses teaching and learning and building-based programming.
Yep.
So where we want to encourage our teachers to have blended ideas and they're ready to start, stuff often gets in the way of consistent programming.
Gotcha.
So we need lots of attention, which is why we're all out looking at different ways to implement and garner buy-in, which is how we ended up with your program.
Gotcha. So I think a couple thoughts on that, and these might, with very little context, but just kind of thinking, it sounds like you're saying there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of the district initiatives that are coming down versus the building level vision for which direction and you actually sounds like you have one of the luxuries of actually having your teachers on board with trying some of these things. They have the right mindset.
Right.
So I think there's kind of two ends of this that we've seen in some of our implementations that might be helpful. But again, it's very difficult if you don't have kind of the ability to support this. But having those, what we've seen in one of the implementations we've been doing this work is when you have the district folks on the design team, even if they're not necessarily the ones that are driving the vision or the ones that are, the first people to bring the book to the table or however, what we've seen is that in a year's worth of them just attending for the vision meeting, the selection of the priority practices, doing those actual student shadows and debriefing those student shadows, creating that data measurement plan and having some degree of input, but also having other parents at the table so and teachers at the table they can hear from, that it's almost like a learning course, almost like a course for them in just being part of that design team over the course of that first year. And what we've found is that, their kind of concerns around, fidelity to curriculum, or their concerns around, multiple initiatives that have already been implemented, or that those pieces, they start to realize that your initiative is less about blended learning and technology and this software or that software, or this distraction or that distraction, but it's really rooted in instructional strategies and practices and the integration of curriculum and instructional strategies. And so their anxiety level starts to drop a little bit. And if you have even a couple of them that are willing to be on that team, they tend to bring that information back to their colleagues, which reduces their anxiety. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, we're going to get into a little bit more deeply today when we talk a bit further about the barrier mapping component of this work, and really that idea of helping, you're using those early mindset teachers, those pilot teachers, to really identify very clean and clearly which ways the district initiatives are actually impeding some of that progress, and then being able to make sure that you're thinking very strategically about who at the district level you're inviting into what conversations to target those pieces of feedback, which are built around teachers that are sticking their neck out but encountering these very specific barriers. So I don't know how helpful that is, but that's just a couple thoughts kind of off the top of my head as we're kind of diving into this.
Very good.
Cool. Who else wants to share?
Yeah, I could jump in.
Awesome.
So, I think looking at the rubric and going through the book with, we kind of had some of the things already in place. It's been an initiative in Cranford, New Jersey for a couple of years, but it's never really had the traction or definitive kind of path forward. It's had hits and misses. It's got little pockets. It was actually funny reading the book. There's a lot of things that are in the book that it's like, oh yeah, we do that. That was a problem. That was a mistake we made. It kind of, it's like, it was very clear reading the book that we had done some of the things we shouldn't have done. And so what we really did was kind of backtrack and kind of scratch away all the stuff we had put out previously and use the book to give ourselves a new framework. So that was super helpful. Part of the issue we're currently dealing with is all the, things like getting that design team to be free to go visit teachers, time for those pilot teachers to get some specific coaching on personalized learning. So we have kind of legacy professional development models that I think are a little bit of a barrier right now, that I'm trying to find ways to free up some folks so that they can get that training that they need, specifically in those parts of personalized learning we want to focus on. Because it used to be, we kind of it was very generic PD on personalized learning, and we kind of cut them loose. So that's the biggest obstacle from the rubric we're staring at now, is how do we get to do some of the activities that are, time heavy, and get the teachers free to do them. That's our big problem at the moment.
Yeah, that is a challenge, especially when the kind of the design of the district as it currently exists with regard to FTEs or regard to current common planning time structures is built on the legacy models, but you're trying to shift. I think the way we've framed that in some instances, when you can't make those adjustments in real time, is to kind of think almost in terms of like compared to what. And so kind of like tiering, think the ways you think about that. Like the ultimate goal is that you're attempting to personalize your adult learning in the same ways that you want the teachers to personalize the student learning, right? And so really what you're saying is like our early adopter teachers, we want to be thinking about what levels of coaching and embedded support we can get to them. So how do we free that up? Our teachers on the other side of the chasm, we might need, lighter touch, easy, kind of less anxiety raising, more kind of like step-by-step laying the foundation kind of pieces. But eventually, as those ideas come to fruition with the early adopters, we're going to be bringing those across the chasm to them. And so one of the things you want to start with is this: yes, can we get a coach? Is there a way we can get a coach for our early adopters? And I know that that's often difficult when you're built around a kind of workshop model.
Right.
Second level down is just being able to figure out a way, and maybe it's through stipended opportunities, or maybe it's through, it's often difficult through common planning time because maybe they don't share the same grade level or content area, but just even PLC time together with the right group of early adopters where they have the right mindset for this work, with even one person from the design team who really wants to make it work and can kind of work as a facilitator, even if they don't have deep expertise in blended or personalized coaching, is enough sometimes to make those teachers feel supported in ways that they will take those risks, even without an actual embedded coach. And then that PLC time or that additional common planning time, or wherever you're able to carve that time, you can also use that to start to codify strategies that are coming out of that work, and then think about how those strategies can scale to the rest in more of a workshop model that sounds like it's already in place. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it's kind of compared to what if we don't have that coach, maybe we can at least get the teachers together. Okay, we can't get all the teachers together. Maybe we can at least get a couple teachers together. Okay, we can't even get a couple teachers together. Maybe we can at least get one-on-one check-ins with some of these teachers. So it's kind of like you got to kind of go down that list of like ideal to like what we actually can afford and structure to do.
Yeah, it's really the tough thing is that intensity, because I have some folks ready to, they're already doing stuff. And their question is like, am I doing this right? And it's a great question because, you can personalize wrong, which like, as you mentioned in the book, you can do it poorly. And in some cases we may be. So getting those people who are dying to do it, that intense, focused coaching, that's the hardest part of it.
I will say though, like again, what I'm kind of trying to get at is that if they're really that gung-ho and they're that self-reflective that they're even coming through to say, I could be doing this wrong, like you don't necessarily need an expert to support those people.
Right.
They oftentimes can help each other, or somebody that is just at least a sounding board to be able to kind of say like, well, if this is the intent of the practice, how is it reacting? To ask your students, what do they say? Ask the families, what do they say? Like you can kind of structure some ways using that balance measure feedback to reassure the firm that they are moving in the right direction. I think the key is having that data measurement plan in place so that at least there's some structure to limit the unintended consequences.
Good point. Yep. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else want to jump in?
Hi, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Audra. I'm from Clark County School District, and we're a little unique in we are the 5th largest district in our nation.
Yes.
And our school district is an empowerment district. So each of our schools have the ability to choose how they implement things.
Yeah.
So in our online and blended learning department, we've started a blended initiative to help personalize and blend the process. The problem we're facing is because it is an empowerment, we often have to meet schools where they are. And because of that, we haven't been able to really come up with a clear strategic plan. So as I look at the rubric, I have certain schools that are ready to level up. They're doing amazing things. And then I have schools that really need attention. So as we move to more and more schools going one-to-one with devices, we're really looking to try and find a strategic plan to go forward. I would say one of the aha moments we had on the last webinar was when you talked about the different aspects of using data. I think we've always been really focused on student achievement, and so that was really interesting to talk about looking at ways to expand that. So that's the one area I know for everyone that we really want to focus on as we look to the next year, is looking at those other aspects and how that can really support our schools as they look to where they need to go with the next level, because we've never used survey data. We've done some walkthroughs, but I would say they're very much tied to observations instead of just the guided and coaching process. Yeah. So I like that idea of encouraging our coaches and admin to look at that differently. But we're kind of in a weird, unique situation because we haven't been given the freedom to do a full-scale district initiative. It's very piece by piece.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And I think, you know, my advice on this, and again, a lot of this, all of this advice I'm giving right now is like, take with a huge grain of salt, knowing that I'm getting tiny bits of information from you. But the thinking around, in my opinion on this, and this is kind of counterintuitive, is that when you're thinking about a district level initiative, to when you have multiple schools, especially schools that have so much autonomy in how they operate, for guiding them, the kind of natural inclination is to try and figure out something that you can bring to all of them. But I think the actual right next step is the opposite, to pick one of them and actually focus entirely on going deep with them through this actual process in a way that brings more people from your district team, more people from your community, more of your teachers, more of your students, all together to learn together, and almost like similar to what I was saying was it Eric? Yeah, Eric was the first person that we were talking to, right? Where you're learning through the process in a way that then almost creates more pockets of people that can then bring that process into some of the other schools that might bubble up as ready. It's really counterintuitive because your idea is, I want to get to scale, so I want to do work across all of these buildings, or even you may not even have permission to not focus on all the buildings. But I do honestly believe that by picking one and really truly trying to implement soup to nuts in one, maybe over a 2 or 3 year period of time, the learnings you have from that one and the ways you're going to be able to bring other people through that process and then speak more clean and clearly about all the different steps within that local context of that one will have incredible value to the rest in ways that anything you create is going to have less value to the rest. I don't know, that might not be even doable within your context, but that's just a thought.
No, that's really great, because we do have, especially coming up this next coming school year, schools that are in that position. So that would be great feedback, and that's a great way to then scale from there. So no, I really like that idea, and we'll take that to the team. It's a good idea.
We actually have one of our folks, one of the places where we're doing this work, so we've done our year one implementation, and the district leadership got so excited about it that they're now shifting all of their building level coaches to be these instructional leads who are going to actually study the book and the framework process. And we're bringing them through that one school that was kind of a year ahead. And then they're going to actually be, as they see us go through the phases, then bringing that back to the other school in which they're already kind of positioned. And so there's, you can videotape each of those processes. You can almost create your own asynchronous materials for how to do the vision meeting, how to set up a measurement plan. All those materials become scalable at that point, and almost, in some degrees asynchronous for the next wave of people to do it in more schools. So, George, you want to jump in with a question, or any thoughts?
Yes. Hi. I have mixed feelings when looking to this rubric. The good one is because it's a really nice guide what you pursued, and the bad one is that looking at my situation in the schools that I know here in Brazil, I'm working with 2 private schools and trying to go to some public schools. I realized that we don't have even the awareness of the personalization is the way to follow. Like the idea of let's update this one-size-fits-all system is not established. So my challenge here is how to start a conversation, or how to bring, I would say, the vision in the first place to start to break the inertia, to start following the book, which I think it's perfect to do this change management mindset, looking at different schools in different ways in order to personalize. But I think that I still have to made up my mind how to go to some schools and some guys to try to pilot some ideas or to change the mindset.
That's yeah, George, I totally understand where you're coming from in that scenario, because if you often in Rhode Island, when I'm thinking about like 8 years ago when we first started this work, and there were really no pockets of it in any locations to bring people to, it's exponentially harder to be able to get the right mindsets to the table to even form a design team, to even begin to think about interrogating practice. I think that the pieces of advice that I would have is that, number one, and probably the most critical would be student shadows. That if it's a one size fits all model, and you are able to at least get some of those adults to take a half a day, take a full day, to walk in the user experience of the students who are, tuned out, turned off, unengaged, and to sit in those hard chairs and to listen to those lectures and to have to do those worksheets and to have to kind of just feel what it feels like to be a student in their own environment. And then you're able to somehow bring a conversation together to debrief that experience. I think that oftentimes is a really interesting catalyst for this work. The second piece that I would say is accessing some degree of video online. And, the Learning Accelerators Practices website is a great one for that. EdSurge has some really good videos of personalized learning classrooms. The Teaching Channel has got some really good personalized learning videos. Better Lesson has got some good stuff that kind of takes you into classrooms. You get to hear from the teachers and experience what it can look like on the other side, because I think oftentimes people their mindset is not necessarily fixed. They just can't imagine anything else. And so that opportunity to bring video to bear, along with the ability to experience it as a student, I think that's probably the way to start greasing that wheel and starting to move things in at least a direction where you might be able to get a formation of a design team at least one of the schools.
That's great. Thank you very much. I will try some of them.
All right. And let us know if you need those links to those sites. We're happy to send those along as well.
Okay, great.
Go. Roshni, did we miss anybody?
Nope, I think we got everyone. That's all four.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so we're gonna move forward now. We're gonna have another chance to kind of come back together as a group, just kind of reorienting you back to the framework and the fact that today, we're really gonna be focused mostly on the grow and network phases of the framework. We're going to, kind of talk a little bit today. The way I kind of want to frame this is through Frisbee golf. Are there any Frolf people on the line? Anyone that's ever done this before? It's kind of a wacky sport. You basically are in the woods, kind of like a glorified hike, and you're attempting to throw a Frisbee through a myriad of trees at a hole. And I kind of experienced this recently and had kind of an aha moment with regard to the framework, because very similar to that visual that we have of the cross-country travel and how you have to kind of know where you're headed. One of the challenges in Frolf is that oftentimes when you're throwing off from your first intended location, you can't even see the hole. There's like trees upon trees upon trees upon trees. You don't even know what the orientation is in terms of moving directly forward toward a goal. And you know where your goal, you have a goal, but you don't even know what it is or where it looks like. And so when you're thinking about scale and when you're thinking about moving this work forward, in some ways, the earliest stages of the framework process are the building of this kind of a course map. You have, basically decided that if these are most people's normal starting points, these are most people's normal endpoints, and we've identified some of the barriers that commonly get in the way, and we've told you how many attempts it should take you to actually get down the course to your established goal. And along the way, should you happen to go astray, should you happen to try something and it fails, or you bite off too much, more than you can at the right time, we've got enough scaffolding there in place to be able to get you back on track, get you back to where you need to go. And so this map is incredibly essential before you actually start out and try and get other people to come out and start throwing the Frisbee. You want to know where you're headed. So I'm hoping that analogy lands a little bit for you, because honestly, what we're going to be talking about today is how do you bring more people along in this process. And if you send somebody out to a Frisbee golf course without this map and just say, hey, we're all playing frolf today, you're going to get a lot of frustration. You're going to get a lot of people that are going to wait for you to say, okay, now we can all go grab beers. And they're just going to wait it out, and this too shall pass. And that's really the way that educational initiatives have kind of come and gone, according to the, as we've done historically. So moving forward, really what we're talking about, and I'm bringing it back to our Rogers innovation curve, because essentially at this point in the process, we have established that early adopters have created, compelling pilot classrooms. We know that we want to scale these initiatives. We've seen success, and we're trying to get across the chasm to the other side, to the early majority, into the late majority, and even pick up some of those laggards. And so today we're going to kind of frame for you some of the ways in which we think about this work, and why those earliest phases of the framework that we spend so much time on are really the places in which you lean heavily once you get to the later phases of bringing other people along. So Cathy always talks about this, and I feel like, in some ways, pay homage here to Cathy, but Cathy often talks about how, no matter how well you follow the book, no matter how well you build your initial early adopter pilot classrooms, if you have not, as a lead change agent or as an educator in the building, or even as a district leader who is sitting on the design team and guiding the process, if you have not been attuned to the culture of the building, no scaling is going to happen regardless of what moves and structures you have in place. I'll give you an example. We actually have one of our implementations that we're working in right now, where we have 3 pilot teachers in this elementary school that could not be bigger advocates for this work after a year's worth of piloting 8 personalized learning practices in their classroom. We have them on video raving about it. We have them talking to their colleagues and co-teachers. We have them showing up at conferences and talking about the work that they're doing. However, when we actually reached out this month to the rest of the staff to say, okay, we're ready to move on. We're ready to bring more people into this work. We've got incredible opportunity for more coaching for anybody who's interested. It was crickets. And part of the reason that we're now realizing, as we've now kind of gone back to the drawing board and really listened to the teachers and talked to the teachers and understood more deeply where some of the challenges and pain points are for why they don't want to continue and carry this work, what they've said is they haven't felt like all year long, as we've been focused on the early adopter teachers, that we haven't been honoring the work they've been doing in their own classrooms. Some of them have felt like the documentation, the school visits, the almost like amplification of the work that's been happening in the pilot teachers' classrooms has almost been overwhelming in a way that they don't want to sign up for. Some of them have felt like they see these pilot teachers and they look exhausted and they look like they're working so hard. And even though they're enjoying it and they're saying great things at the end of the day, they're not getting paid extra. So why would I do that? And so what we realized, and we got very lucky because we realized this just in time at the end of May and into this beginning phase of June, we could actually solve for and answer many of those questions. And so we now actually do have 4 more teachers ready to kind of take this work and carry it forward. But really what happened was we took our eye off the ball of the rest of the culture of that building, and we're not as adaptive as we needed to be to the needs of the other teachers and communicating to the other teachers as we were moving this pilot process along. So one of the things you have to be mindful of is that even though you're going to be uber focused on those early adopters that are running those pilot classrooms, the rest of your team needs to be nurtured. And that culture of that building needs to be nurtured. And the communication of what's happening in those pilot classrooms needs to be balanced. It needs to be both amplified in terms of the risks those teachers are taking, but it also needs to be not that they are, being shown as the favored son, but that everybody is special and everybody has value within this building and within this environment. That's a difficult thing to balance as a lead change agent, but we definitely now have some strategies for how to do that moving forward in other environments. And so we're actually going to be starting to document some of that work as well and putting out more resources regarding the culture piece. But I just want to kind of emphasize that culture component, because I think oftentimes it seems counterintuitive. You're focused on those pilot teachers. You take your eye off the ball, it's going to be very hard to advance the work beyond those initial early adopters. So let's talk a little bit. I've got some gross videos here that I want to show you. Roshni hates these videos, but I think that they're actually really important, because one of the other things that's really a key component of this work is your mental vision for what scale looks like. Oftentimes when we say the word scale in education, what we are really meaning is replication. And replication in the sense that if I have one pilot classroom that is working really, really well, then all I want to do, oops, how do I play that video, Rosh? Here we go. All I want to do is, just like cell division, I want that pilot classroom to replicate and become another pilot classroom and another pilot classroom and another pilot classroom. And I want all these classrooms to look identical. But if you think about Rogers Curve and you think about the mindsets and the skill sets that the teachers on the other side of the chasm have, what is more likely is it's going to look like, you know, bacterial growth, in terms of the fact that you don't actually know what's going to grow or scale where, and that if the conditions that you're setting up are right, then the growth is going to actually happen pretty quickly in certain pockets where you have made the right conditions available. So going back to that culture conversation, or going back to that ability to scaffold some of those strategies in very clean and clear ways. And we're going to talk about some of the ways to make those conditions sound as we move through the rest of this presentation. But I just want to make sure that you have the right mental picture of what scale means, because too often people think it looks like cell division, when more likely it looks like mold or bacteria growth. So hopefully you're not eating as we're doing this workshop, but I think that this is an important component of that mental picture you have as agents trying to drive this change. All right, I don't want to watch that again. Let's move on. How do I get, there we go. So scale is ultimately, it's about people, right? And it's about people convincing other people that the ideas that are working in one location or in one classroom have value to them in other locations and in other classrooms. So what are some of the ways that you share value? What are some of the ways that you convince people that there's a better way of doing business than the current way that they're doing business? So some people think, how do you know if what you're talking about is better than what I'm already doing, right? You probably know some of these folks. They have maybe a one-size-fits-all model. They maybe have a stand and deliver model. They might be some of the most amazing sage on the stage, like, you know, grooving hands, like they can keep everybody engaged, and all the students are sitting up super engaged, they're super excited, and they're getting good test scores, and they might be saying to you, how do you know that this is better? So this is the crucial place where that data story becomes essential. But other people might think, wow, that looks so difficult and so messy. I wouldn't even know where to begin. And so for these people, you have to be thinking about your implementation pathways. In those pilot classrooms, have you done a good enough job of documenting what those strategies look like? Have you done a good enough job of collecting all of those protocols and lesson plans and resources and hyperlinks, so that these teachers who think it's super difficult and messy don't have to start from scratch in the same ways that your early adopters did? But then there's some people who think, leaders at the school and district level, you know what? They don't care about us. They don't listen to us. This is never going to work because of X, Y, or Z. And for those people, dismissing them as cranky, dismissing them as jaded, dismissing them as, you know, close to retirement is actually the worst thing you can possibly do. Because in many ways, they've been in that district, they've been in that building long enough that this is not unfounded. This probably is the message they've received up until this point. And so in some ways, you have to show them, you have to take some bullet for them to show that you really do listen to them and that their targeted complaint or their targeted feedback is going to be honored. And so that's where the barrier mapping piece becomes so essential and important. I think what you think about it though, most people are actually a combination of all three. So they have some degree of show me the data, some degree of help, I don't know how to do this, and some degree of how is this even possible when enter whatever barrier they can think of. And so as leaders of lead change agents driving this work, these are the critical components that when we're starting that plan phase, when we're moving through that pilot phase, it's why we have to be so attuned to the data story, the implementation pathways, and the barrier mapping as we go, okay? We're gonna dive a little bit deeper into that now, but before we do, just wanna launch a poll that Roshni created to kind of see how are you guys feeling about this? How does this resonate with you? Are these the right factors that you hear in your own local context? So Roshni, I'm not sure exactly how we do that.
Yep, give me 1 sec. I'm gonna launch it in 1 minute. We can go to the next slide. It'll show the question there so people know what they're answering.
All right, here we go.
All right, give me 1 sec. Whoop, hold on. Can you guys all see a test question? I'm sorry, let me try and get that out of there.
Yep, see it.
All right, sorry, bear with us. Here, the question is written right there. The question says, based off your experience working with staff in your local context, which do you think is the most important to establish? That's the question you guys are answering. And I'm gonna drop the 4 answers right into the chat window. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why it's not showing up in the poll, but your 4 options that you're gonna choose from are right in the window. So A is data story, B is implementation pathways, C is barrier mapping, or D is a mix of all 3. So again, based off your experience working with staff in your local context, which of these 3 do you think is the most important, or is it a mix of all 3? And you should have the poll in front of you. You can just click on whichever answer you think is the best fit for your local context.
Could you say them again? Sorry.
Yep, absolutely. And they're in the chat window as well. But A is data story, B is implementation pathways, C is barrier mapping, and D is a mix of all 3.
George said D as well.
All right, George said D. If you see the poll in front of you, you can click on that. And if you can't see it, then you can just respond in the chat window. Sorry, there's always one thing that's going to go wrong during these webinars. Today, it's the polls.
Is that everybody, Roshni, with 4 people weighing in? Or
we have a 5th one who just joined too, Ann Tremonti just joined from Renton.
all right, not sure if Ann got a chance to hear the first explanation though, so maybe we should let her off the hook. So the reason for doing the poll and the reason for the self-reflection on this is because you can't do everything, right? It's very difficult to be amazing at everything when you're managing these change initiatives. And so if you do have a D though, if you do have this mix and balance where you know you have some folks that are really uber focused on the data story, and you have some folks that are focused on, I need supports, and you have some folks that are really focused on, oh, this ain't gonna work for this reason or that reason, then you do have to maintain them all. However, if like you have answer B, and you know that answer B, my people wanna do this, they just need help, then really it's actually a bit of a relief, because your data story then is less critical. It's not critical, you still have to do it, but it's less critical. Your barrier mapping and getting your district leadership to kind of consider some of these barriers is less critical. What you can really focus on is building these incredible implementation pathways and really thinking about how am I going to personalize professional instruction. And so that's an opportunity to kind of really think more as you're designing the earlier phases of the plan and pilot phase, knowing what your people are their biggest kind of like almost like what's it called, like profile. What's the number 1 profile? It can kind of help you focus your attention in some of those ways. And even if you want to think about the profile of that early majority, right? Because even if that early majority is much more of of a data story, or much more of an implementation pathway, or much more of a barrier mapping. And you can even focus there first and maybe start to build the data story later, or maybe start to build some of the barrier mapping later. So you can kind of prioritize your scaling over time if you can really identify what are the real levers that my people in my local context need to hear from me and these initial pilots. All right, I'm going to end the poll and keep us moving. Thank you for that. Sharing the results. Stop and sharing the results. Moving on. Here we go. All right. So we talk about, I think we hit this on the head. I'm going to go through this quickly. So these are the three that we think about using as supports for crossing the chasm. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the data story. And I'm actually incredibly excited that I was on email before this call, and I was actually talking to Roshni about it, I think when Audra jumped on. But we have been in an implementation for a year now in one of these elementary schools that we're supporting. And we have been collecting process measure data, and we just actually got back our process measure data and saw almost a full point of growth across 7 out of the 8 priority practices that this school selected on the process measure, on the walkthroughs. It was unbelievable. And each and every member of our design team did walkthroughs in those classrooms and also documented some of the very specific strategies that they saw in those classrooms. And we now have all of that documentation to guide us in videotaping and collecting actual implementation pathways for each of these particular classrooms to use with the next set of teachers that we're bringing on. But the most exciting part, I'm really over the moon about this, we just got back our outcome measures. And so for the end of year 1, we're looking at we use Star Renaissance as the interim assessment tool in this particular district. So looking at STAR math data, the students in the 4th grade pilot classroom outscored the other 4th grade classroom by 18.7% of growth over the course of the year. That's an aggregate. We haven't really unpacked the subgroup data yet. Like I said, we just got this data. So in comparison to the classroom that's not doing blended across the hallway, 18.7% more growth on average in that classroom. Now, if you compare it also to a control group across the district, so you look at the district average for 4th grade in math on STAR, they outperformed the district as a whole by 10%. This is the lowest socioeconomic school in this district, outperformed the district average by 10% in the first year of implementation. Now, as we're starting to bring the district on board, as we're starting to bring more and more teachers within this building on board, as we're starting to think about which other schools within this district might want to start thinking about personalized practices, that's a really exciting opportunity now to share that data story and show, hey, when you give students more autonomy, hey, when you use these particular priority practices, this is actually what happens within the data. And so that outcome story really becomes an incredibly powerful communication engine for the work. Couple that with the fact that I just received an email from one of the parents in this exact same classroom who essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that my student being in that classroom has been the greatest educational experience my student has had. The autonomy that he has felt in his work, I believe, is leading to him having more success academically. Whatever I can do as a parent to help scale this work across the building and across more schools in the district, please let me know. I want to get involved. So now we have process measure, outcome measure, balance measure, all showing that this year-long pilot, specifically in this 4th grade classroom, we also have K-1 data that we haven't crunched yet, is actually, leaning toward something that we can use to then bring other people along. Does that make sense to everyone in terms of next steps? Awesome. So yeah, so the data story becomes that opportunity to go back to those teachers who say, how do you know this is better than what I'm doing? You can actually show them by pulling together these control samples. It actually is. It's doing better than what you're doing. Let's talk about implementation pathways. Going back to that mold and bacteria spread versus the replication concept, we really like this quote. I know you probably have already read this quote in the book, but it is unreasonable to ask a professional to change much more than 10% a year. it's unprofessional to ask them to change by less. I think one of the ways we go astray often in this work is believing that just because one teacher can do something, any teacher should be able to do that. And so one of the things that we needed to make clear in this school where we were having a hard time recruiting more pilot teachers for year 2 is we had to make it clear to them that you do not have to do what that teacher before you did. That we are going to start with you in the same personalized model that we want you to use with your students. And so by reducing that anxiety, by lowering and measuring our expectations of how quickly those teachers will see change, we might extend the amount of time it takes for that mold to grow, right? And in that photo, that was a time lapse that was way sped up in terms of how actually fast that mold grew. But it's growing, and it's going to grow, and it's going to spread, and you're going to actually get traction that's stickier than if you say, hey, you see this teacher over here who's amazing? Be like her, jump higher, run faster, do better. It doesn't work that way. No matter how many times we try that, it just doesn't work that way. And so how do we do that? We create these implementation pathways. And we believe that implementation pathways, the number one way you can go wrong is by losing sight of your initial vision for the pilot and losing sight of those priority practices. So your implementation pathways should be built around that initial why for doing this work in the first place, which is those priority practices. And so everything kind of becomes aligned to those priority practices. Now, I want to be very clear. This is one model for how to build an implementation pathway that you can do very quickly and easily in a Google Doc. We have a ton of other examples that if you go to our pathways-to-personalization.com website, we're starting to populate a lot of those examples. If you reach out to Cathy or I, we're happy to share some of those. And I believe that in the deck, if you click on this, it actually is a hyperlink to an implementation pathway around collaboration, where we actually have some very specific examples of how teachers in a pilot classroom were developing collaboration as a skill, which is 1F on our walkthrough tool. But you'll see here, we have 4 columns. Strategies, what are the strategies you're using to support this priority practice? Resources, with hyperlinks to actually get out to those resources. Some of them are, much more offline. Some of them are online, but resources that these teachers can actually grab and use. Photos and video of how a teacher might introduce that work, or maybe a teacher talking about the practice after the fact, after they've already implemented it. But video is incredibly powerful for helping to scale strategies. And then you see over here, we always want to connect the strategy to the person who is the expert at that strategy within that specific building or district. Because you want to encourage that cross-colleague collaboration. You want to encourage that idea that anyone can be an expert on this, that you don't have to go to the Highlander Institute, or you don't have to go out to find a district trained coach, that there are people that have expertise right here in our own midst, right across the hallway. And so that's really the one way you can structure these implementation pathways to get at that 10% of growth or more that next teacher wants to do as you're bringing more people along. I'm going to keep moving here. Let's talk a little bit about reducing barriers. So reducing barriers, as I mentioned with that one profile, is really about, I'm going to take a step back on this. Excuse me, I'm just going to get a glass of water. I drink of water here. Reducing barriers is really just about showing these teachers in your local context that you care, that you're not so arrogant, so confident, so bold as to say that any of what you're attempting to ask them to do is easy, or that the system that isn't just even your school or your district, but that sits within a city that has a school committee and a mayor, that sits within a state that has a state department of education and a governor, that sits within the context of poverty and all the different things that happen with regard to our systems and structures that fall apart for different families and students that are beyond their control. And so reducing barriers is less of about you as an individual having to solve every one of their problems, as much as it is about you as an individual acknowledging that there are problems and that there are certain problems that if we work together, we can reduce them. We may not solve them, we may not eradicate them, but we can reduce them. And if I show you that I'm willing to listen to you as you identify those barriers, and if I show you that I'm even willing to maybe solve one or two small ones, you'll be amazed at how much traction and how much trust and how much further that teacher or that set of teachers is going to be willing to push. And so we kind of want to create a structure for how to organize and talk about those barriers, because they can get overwhelming incredibly quickly. And so we really like, and you probably read about this in the book, the Meyer and Selos innovation and scaling for impact framework. Because when it breaks down the barriers, it breaks them down into buckets that are a little bit easier to think about with regard to your design team and your teacher experience. It allows you to kind of organize the feedback that the teachers are having that come out of those pilot classrooms. It allows you to organize the feedback you're getting from the teachers on the other side of the chasm. And what it does is it allows you then to think about where are the early wins within these different ones, and who are the actual people that I need to bring to the table to have this conversation. Because oftentimes in education, and I'm sure you all have been there, you oftentimes are having a barrier reducing conversation with a group of people who actually have no impact on reducing that barrier. You don't have the right people even in the room, so it just becomes a complaint fest. And so what this framework allows you to do is to target the barrier, think about who would need to be in the room to address and identify and discuss this barrier, and then focus as a design team on creating that meeting and that opportunity to go after those low-hanging fruit and be able to come back to your teachers and say, hey, I went and talked to that guy or that woman, and look what I was able to get for you. And now this thing exists. I'm going to give you an example before I go into the next examples. One of the districts that we're working in, where they've been attempting to try and to scale some of this work, but they've been doing it in the lower elementary grades more predominantly. And they have 3 or 4 ed tech products that they've been using for their math and their ELA blended learning models. The teachers have gone through all of the hoops of creating little cards that each student has that they wear around their neck, that they pull up and they're able to read their passwords and type in their passwords. They've organized those cards in these really nice rows so that the students can access them, and they know, okay, if I want to be on, they have choice. So if I want to be on this product, then I go and I grab this one off the hook and I put it around my neck. Amazing system, right? We could have documented that system and put it into an implementation pathway and taught every other teacher across that school and even across that district how to create the cards, how to make the necklaces. But what we realized when talking to some of those pilot teachers is that as nice as those cards are and as wonderful of an example that is of an inventive way of solving a problem, it's actually a giant pain in the butt and wastes a lot of student time when they could be actually accessing the curriculum directly and immediately. And so what we identified, because we've worked in other schools and districts, was that, you know what, clever badges might actually be a better and faster way to get some of those students into that process. The teachers surfaced the problem, the barrier. The principal then went and had a meeting at the district office with the chief technology officer. We came along because we work with several districts that already use clever badges. We suggested it to the chief technology officer. She considered it. She reached out to one of her colleagues in one of the districts that was using these things. And already, even before the end of this school year, they have already instituted it at this school where the pilots are happening. And they're already discussing ways in which they would scale this across the entire district. And that one step, that one barrier out of like 30 others that the teachers identified, got us so much cachet and so much trust and so much buy-in with those teachers. And it was such a tiny step that the district was actually really willing and able to solve for it. And so sometimes it's the little things, and sometimes they're much bigger things. So here's an example of a barrier map with some of them that, you know, you could probably kind of like target and think about, but you want to be thinking about them within the buckets, and you want to be thinking about them within with the right people that need to be at the table to solve those problems. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly. The first two on the left-hand side, the economic and cognitive, are probably the easier of the barriers to solve for. The idea of resource allocation is usually a pretty binary concept, right? There is money or there isn't money. It's prioritized or it's not prioritized. Teachers understand that. Oftentimes, all they're looking for is for somebody to just ask the question. Can we buy this? No? Okay, when can we buy this? No? Okay, it's really oftentimes that simple. The technical and the knowledge skills, that is something that you can act on as a growth area. So if you do have district buy-in, if you do have people at the table, they can just learn more information, get smarter around these knowledge and skills, be able to support their teachers better as coaches, be able to support the technical snafus better, be able to buy or have better high quality curriculum so that the tasks are more rigorous. There's definite ways in which you can build up your knowledge. Now, the two on the right, legacy systems and power, those are often the ones that are the hardest to move. Legacy systems, things like bell schedules and grade levels and scheduling and college requirements and you know, basic education requirements that are in your state policies. Those are difficult. And oftentimes they require somebody who's dogged and wants to go into the regulation and read it more closely. They require somebody who's been in the district long enough that they remember why it was this way in the first place. And then you can start to push on and oftentimes get even some of your superintendents or leaders to say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense. Why are we doing it that way? The last one is probably the hardest. It's power. And oftentimes power is something that you can't, even if you have the best of intentions, and even if you have the best data story and the best scaffolding and the best barrier map on earth, you oftentimes have people that are just inflexible and unwilling to budge. So this is the place where just building the number of people that are behind your effort, the number of parents, the number of students, the number of teachers that are calling for this work is oftentimes the only way to really approach that power and flexibility barrier. So that's a lot of words on barrier mapping, but I think it's very important. I think now we're going to actually go back to a poll, and then we're going to go into a small group conversation to close out the last 25 minutes of our session.
So for the poll, we may not actually have to use the poll feature again, but if you guys don't mind going into the chat window, and basically as Shawn was talking, I'm sure you're thinking about all the barriers that you see in your own school or district that may fall into one of these buckets. So just looking back at those four, give us some ideas and some context in the chat window. Which of those buckets, that category of barriers, do you see as the biggest challenge in your school or district? What have you come across that you think is a real obstacle? So feel free to drop it right in here and give us some more context, then we can kind of respond to that and see what are the trends and challenges that you guys are facing as you're going through this work. I see that Ann and Bob just joined from Renton. Welcome. We'll give you guys the link to everything so you guys have the link to the deck so you guys can jump right in where we are.
Barrier free, Roshni. We're barrier free.
What's that?
Yeah, we're barrier free. I don't see any. School culture mindset.
Mm-hmm.
What students are capable of. Yeah. Normative is the most difficult. Yeah, those legacy structures are incredibly challenging to overcome. I think when you're talking about the mindset and of the students and what the students are capable of, You know, that's really kind of, you know, also built within just the framework itself, and kind of that moving and building up of that data story to show how when you actually do follow some of these personalized practices, you actually do see incredible growth, incredible opportunity, incredible engagement on the part of students. And so, you know, the barrier mapping may not be the best fit for some of that teacher level or school level mindset work. The barrier mapping is more kind of that idea of what are the pieces around the implementation that we might need support around. The normative and the economic. Yeah, the economic one is also, you know, depending on your current situation and your current climate and culture within your state. You know, we have a lot of budget cuts that are actually happening here in Rhode Island this year, and folks are losing coaches left and right. So that economic piece becomes incredibly important with regard to being able to have the right supports in place to move through the framework. I think that our staff have a cognitive issue, but don't realize. Yeah, that's interesting. That is really about using increased engaging strategies. Maybe the mindset that is hard to sustain. Yeah. And you know, that cognitive issue again is, it's tough to take an entire staff on a learning journey, right? I often think about when I was in the classroom, you know, I never attended a conference in 10 years of my time in the classroom. I never attended a single conference outside of, you know, maybe a professional learning opportunity that was aligned to some school initiative. So I never really got to go to a place where I was able to be around people that were leading edge on anything, or have my opportunity to look across a series of workshops and pick one that I wanted to go to. Since I came out of the classroom and now are involved in the nonprofit world, I'm going to conferences all the time and just seeing the amazing opportunities for learning that are happening. But it really is difficult to take a team on a learning journey that allows them to see kind of what's possible. And so that cognitive piece, that knowledge building, that understanding what's possible, it's a very difficult task. But it is one that if you're noticing that cognitive barrier, you have to kind of figure out, how are we going to invest, which becomes an economic issue. How are we going to invest in some more opportunities for learning together, expanding what's possible in our view of these practices.
I also want to add to this. We had talked about the challenges during the last webinar about how there's a lot of this might just take a lot of time, because we're looking at a really long arc of change over here. Some of these just may take time to actually reduce these barriers. One district that we work with quite often, you know, they had a lot of normative issues, and scheduling is one that comes up a lot, because they wanted to do a lot, but they had really restrictive, you know, 40-minute periods that weren't able to really incorporate a lot of this work. And I think just working with them over 3 years now, they're finally moving to a different bell schedule. They're finally working with collapsing grade levels and being able to have students not be restricted to the tracks that they were originally put in middle school. So a lot of this, I think, just takes time. And as people see the outcomes and how everything is going, they'll slowly start to reduce it themselves. So in this district, the superintendent noticed all the outcomes that were coming out and started to reduce it himself after he saw everything going through. And we've seen some districts that actually some of these barriers, too much of them might also be a barrier as well. There's one district that is actually has a ton of technical skills and really keep pushing the tech part and the actually overusing devices and can't get away from the fact that we don't need devices to personalize learning. So there's some districts that have a little bit too much of some of this, and that can also in itself be a barrier. So I think a lot of this you can also just think of the time it takes to reduce these barriers, not look for change to happen overnight, but also know what the low-hanging fruit is, but also know that a lot of these may eventually get reduced over time as you see the outcomes come through.
And just having conversations about them oftentimes is a grease for reducing them as well. You know, that scheduling conversation, you know, taking a couple, you know, a year or so to kind of investigate, go look at some other places that are doing different schedules, just being able to kind of think a little bit, you know, to be able to have the space for the conversation. You don't actually even have to make a change ultimately, potentially, but it allows the teachers to feel like their voice and their concerns are being honored.
And sometimes they may not even have, you know, a good example of what this looks like. So some districts, we actually help them through our Fuse Fellowship program, a lot of them actually go and visit other districts and are able to see what are the different policies in place that can actually reduce some of these barriers or the culture that is present in the building. So a lot of these may not be barriers that they are aware of, but I think if you show some more examples through visiting other districts or showing videos of other classrooms, even in that own building, I think it starts to open a lot of eyes around this actually might be a barrier that's hindering our progress towards this, and how can we actually actively work to reduce this as well.
Good point. All right, so we're gonna move now into some small group discussions and close out with two kind of like big questions. Probably questions that we are not gonna be able to solve in 15 minutes, but questions that are probably pretty important to talk through. And ones that I'm sure you're facing, and we deal with them in the book, and so we wanted to kind of touch upon them briefly here at the end in a small group format. Roshni, I can't really tell how many folks we have online and whether we should go into a breakout room or if we should stay together as a whole group.
I think we can break out now. We have 6 people on now, and Meg from McGraw Hill just joined as well. So I think we could have 2 groups that we have some good discussions around this, because these are pretty meaty questions that everyone can have a voice around.
All right, so hang in there. Roshni's gonna send you, well, Brian's leaving, so we're down 1. Do you still wanna do that?
You know what, maybe we'll just, and actually, yeah, George just texted me, he has to run too. You know, why don't we just stay all together at this point? We're down to 4 now. We can just stay here.
No problem, Brian. You do not have to apologize. Be well. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, so we have Audra and Ann and Bob. I believe you guys are both from Renton, right? Do you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick and let us know what your roles are in Renton? We didn't get to talk to you guys earlier.
Hi, everybody. I am Bob Ettinger, Director of Digital Learning in Renton, and I'm sad that I wasn't able to join many of these other calls, but I'm excited I got to hop in at the end here, and I'm excited to continue digging into this book. You know, I think our team does all sorts of great things around digital learning, personalized learning being a component of that, but not like the entire function of our team. This question about curriculum is one that I'm personally very interested in, because I think the tensions between kind of like rigorous tasks and personalization, there's often, I don't think there has to be, but I think there's often, so I'm excited to begin.
Great, and is your colleague Ann joining us as well?
And Ann, if you're driving and can't get on, don't worry about it. We can loop you in on the chat. So why don't we kick off with the curriculum question and build on Bob's statement. Good to see you, Bob. Tell Ellen I said hello, miss her.
I will.
All right. And you know, I think Bob kind of nails it, that there is this kind of almost false tension that has been built up. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that in a lot of cases up until this point, you know, when we've seen this, there have been, in the early days of blended learning, and maybe not even in the early days, maybe even still, oftentimes when you walk into a classroom that might be having opportunities for choice, or classrooms that have opportunities for students to have more self-directed learning, or are classrooms where students are getting extreme amounts of differentiation to the point that they're almost scaffolding so that there's no actual exposure to core content at that grade level, you're instantly opening yourself up for critique and criticism from an entire set of education experts and a pretty significant research base that says that it's the high quality, rigorous material that's in front of the student that actually is what's going to push the student to have to actually chew deeply on the task and be able to actually make progress to be able to hit at grade level standards and actually be successful with, you know, both for college and career. And so this tension has been, I think, partially built through experience, but I think it also has a little bit of, you know, the concept of the emperor doesn't have any clothes with regard to blended and personalized learning, that there's no like meat there. And, you know, and I think that, you know, I'm sure Megan also has like, you know, thoughts and pieces on this as being somebody that's developing curriculum that's meant to be digested within a blended and personalized model through McGraw Hill. There are definitely ways to bring these two pieces together, and a lot of new innovations that have come out. I think the challenge that we still are going to always be struggling with, and I'm curious to hear if anybody has some really good ways that they're approaching this, is that if you think about some of the more traditional curriculum that follows a scripted scope and sequence over a course of 180 days, how do you, in a core content classroom, bring the students along that are struggling and personalize for them? How do you engage students that are bringing us their own culture or their own identity or their own home into the classroom, but the curriculum has no honoring of that available to them? Where are the overlaps? What are some of the ways you're approaching this? I'm really curious to hear if anybody has a really good example of a way in which they're approaching this curriculum conundrum.
Shawn, Eric chimed in saying our instructional coaches are implementing Pineapple, which has been a great opportunity for teachers to see teachers trying new things, as well as for those daring teachers to get some perspectives out of what is working and what isn't.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, we talk about the pineapple chart in the book, and for those that don't know, that's really just an opportunity for teachers to have a chart where they sign up and say, I'm willing to share this strategy, or I'm willing to open my classroom at this period of time. And then the rest of the team, if they have a free time at that period of time or a common planning time, can sign up to observe those particular teachers' classrooms. And it's an incredible way of moving strategies across a building in terms of thinking about how are you bringing other people along. Eric, I'm curious, do you find that actually gets at this curriculum question? And if so, how?
Sorry, I had to unmute. So it's been working really well. And I think the biggest curricular issue that it relates to is the fact that our teachers don't have a vocabulary that has them all talking about the same thing. So some of them are talking about pacing guides, and some are talking about curriculum, and so when they're talking about these things, what happens is they maybe lose a little bit of what is our focus? Are we looking at standards, or are we looking at activities? And so they are mix and matching what they're really talking about.
Wow. That's such a good point. Such a good point. That existentialism of the language ends up getting in the way of actually being able to try and learn from each other's things that are happening.
And that's been our biggest struggle, because we can't seem to get everyone on the same page a lot of the time. So they find that some of the strategies are engaging. Yeah, I'd like to try that, but then they lose focus on that curricular piece of what was I trying to do with it, or was I just trying to engage the kids and work on it for later on.
Gotcha. And so in the book, we kind of talk about that as like the bounded solution, where the practice and the curricular kind of come together. And in some ways, you're going to have teachers that are able to unbundle that themselves. So like take that Eureka module and think about how I can, pull this part out and make it more adaptive, pull this part out and do it more in small group, pull this part out and make it more asynchronous. But a lot of teachers are not able to do that. And it's almost too much and overwhelming. And so that pineapple ability to go and observe somebody else doing it, and maybe even then once you see them do it, maybe even be able to take their particular lesson or take one of their processes and be able to apply it to your own grade level or your own particular module. That's a really interesting way of thinking about. I love that you're getting them on the same page vocabulary wise, but you're also really spreading those strategies around and probably over the chasm.
The other thing we really keep trying to push is common planning times, even if they're not working on the same item. The idea that I'm about to read a passage, has anyone else read that passage? How did it go with your kids? How did you do it? Even just having conversations while you're doing your own planning. We try and push, but we struggle to get the teachers to engage with that.
Yeah. And I think the curiosity there is like, so that, oftentimes that common planning time comes be about the what, becomes about the task. And so within the model that we're describing in the framework, having those practices, those priority practices kind of front and center allows you to take that task and say, yes, I tried it and I did it through this particular practice in this particular way that allows for also, again, some of that common language. So that's really interesting. Definitely think that common planning time and that PLC environment around the curriculum is essential. Having opportunities to get multiple teachers together to be able to share that, both and the pineapple piece of being able to observe each other, are pretty critical for this work, especially in the earlier stages of it. So with the remaining like 5 or so minutes we have, let's move to the next question. I'm really curious, you know, and this was actually, I believe, was it Brian who brought the personalization of the professional learning was kind of his initial problem that he brought to the table at the very beginning? We're curious to hear from you, and the pineapple example is actually a really good one. What are some of the ways that you are simulating these personalized learning practices with your teachers, your adult learners, in an attempt to support the spread of these practices in classrooms with students? So what are some really good and compelling examples that you're using to kind of spread the growth of these practices by actually getting the adult learners to engage in them? Does anyone have any good examples of how they've done that?
One of the things that we've done in Renton is we led some professional learning around choice by giving staff choice in how they learned about choice. And then, of course, metacognitively reflecting on what was the impact on them as adult learners. And so it was a nice way to kind of help them both learn about this concept and experience it as well.
Can you take us one step deeper on that? How did you kind of set that up in terms of like, did you have like a choice board that they got to kind of select asynchronous resources off of? Did you have like experts kind of set up that they could go and select it? Like, how did you structure that?
Yeah, so we've done it a couple different ways. You know, like in our district, we utilize both Canvas and Google Classroom as learning management systems. And so depending on the school, we've kind of done it both ways, or, you know, but anyways, we leveraged Google Classroom and we kind of had 3 different assignments. We framed it as choice of input and choice of output. Even that input output thing though kind of like presumes directionality to learning. But like, you know, there was a video that folks could watch. There was some slides that they could go through. There was a reading that they could go through. And then there were 3 different ways of demonstrating that learning. It was to create a few slides, to create a video, or just to do it on a piece of chart paper. So that was the, and folks could kind of group and pair up as they wanted. And so it was like a 30, 40-minute task overall. And then we did some sharing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And when you set it up that way, you're even almost creating your own implementation pathway around choice in some ways, because a teacher can basically then take, even though that Canvas module or the way you've set it up in classroom, and almost replicate it around, again, whatever happens to be the standard or the skill set or the competency that they're working on the following day. They can think about, oh, well, I could have my students creating either slides or reading an article, or like, so that those opportunities become almost instantly value add for the teachers who are having to think about the replication of this.
Exactly. And that framing, I think, is important. The input question gets closer to the curriculum question for me, which is like, what is the learning task that students are engaging in to learn these things? And, you know, I'm a former science teacher. And so, you know, some really complex kind of hands-on, you know, like one of the things we're wondering about is how to personalize input. Again, almost connotes a kind of like directional, like I am giving you this information, but like a learning experience, and how to really personalize what that is. Yeah. You know, in a way that can both be learning by discovery and collaboration and all of those things.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes it's input in the sense of like, you know, the traditional filling of the bucket, but sometimes it's input in the sense of just stimulating thought, right? Or like some sort of like igniting moment, you know, and so I think that whatever it is that kicks off the wrestling or the chewing, as you know, as Loretta Hammond talks about, like I think that that piece has so much value in terms of framing for teachers to think about when working with students.
Yeah.
I think it's a really cool example.
That's cool.
Any others that folks want to jump into?
Something we do in our district is we put on a summit centered around learning with technology, and we actually make some of the workshop sessions, put the teachers who attend through some of the personalized and blended learning models, forcing them to experience it, and then the next step is helping them kind of design how they could implement that in their classrooms. And then we have from that then gone into their schools as a result of this and done shorter trainings with them, and then coaching sessions. And then we also partner with Q out here on the West, and we do 4 trainings within the year, again focused on that workshop model of running teachers through it and then helping them kind of make some decisions on how they could implement in their classrooms.
You've almost got your own framework of kind of like, first we do this away from even the building. We do this in like a summit where you get to be just a student experiencing the model. And then we take you into an opportunity to kind of build your own off of that model, similar to what Bob was just describing in terms of those slides, or that those choice options could actually be used with students as well as they were used with adults. And then you even follow them back into the building, because you know that once they actually start to go back to the building, some of the things you do away from the building become more difficult. And so you're continually kind of following them down to the point of implementation. That's really powerful. And I think that starting with that of them experiencing it as a student is definitely that approach from a personalization standpoint, where they can really feel it and know how they want to engage in it, and then have a lot more empathy for their own students when they actually begin to implement. Very cool. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I could listen to your ideas and thoughts on these 2 topics for forever, but it is 6 o'clock East Coast time, and so we're going to have to wrap up. And this is the 3rd session, so we are basically saying goodbye. And once again, I want to give a huge thank you to Megan and McGraw Hill for coming up with this idea and helping us make this happen and bringing all of you to the table. We really, really, really value your feedback. We want to do more of these, over the summer into next year. And so the more feedback you can give us, the better. Please take a moment before you hang up, before you leave us, to leave some feedback. And you know where to find us. We're happy to engage further. We are going to be running some book clubs this summer, so watch out on Twitter as we share some of those opportunities. And hopefully we'll see and hear from many of you moving forward. Thanks so much for spending your time with us. We appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be sending out a recording of this in the next few days. So in case you or a colleague missed any part of it, just feel free to show that link to them, and we'll send it out as soon as we can by Friday. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Yes. Bye-bye.